You could say that this veil exists on an individual level. That would be your specific conditioning, right? Would be your veil, because that conditioning is the source from which that conditioning is the source from which what you see through your eyes is given. When you look, what you see is what your conditioning gave you to see, is what you learn through conditioning is a chair is what you see when you look at a chair, and on and on and on until the whole thing is filled in, right? And so that's your personal conditioning, your personal perceptions, your personal experiences. And then humanity has its own conditioning, right? And that is the general conditioning that exists, that comes from the particular society that you came out of, that helped you learn about quote unquote reality, right? That helped prepare you to be a citizen of the planet or a citizen in your particular society, right? And so, and all of that manifests in thought, doesn't it? Yeah, your thinking comes from your conditioning, your education, your DNA, and all of that is what got passed on by your parents, their parents, their parents, their parents, their parents. Yeah, so you could say that this is a condition that has been perpetuated from generation to generation for a long, long time, right? Because if you think back historically, the human race has been crazy for a long, long time, right? And if you go to any history class, if you went to college and studied the history of Western civilization, you studied a lot of wars, didn't you? You studied wars, you studied a lot of human craziness that went on that defies imagination, right? And then here we are now, right? Creating new and different forms of being crazy. Yeah, so those are the veils, yeah. And to break out of that, I mean, one of the things that's clear about the practice that we do is to come out of the veil, to even know there is a veil, right? Because, you know, for most people, they don't know there is a veil. That what I'm saying is a veil they call reality. Yeah, so one of the things that you're discovering through these teachings and practices is that what you thought was reality is not reality. What you thought was you was not you, right? And so that's a pretty radical assertion, right? And not only is it a pretty radical assertion, but most people are grounded in their conditioning. Most people are grounded in what they believe to be reality. And that's one of the reasons why these numbers of people who are practicing these things and studying these things continue to be small. Because the reality that is the prime reality that humanity lives in or follows, right, has a tremendous amount of agreement, doesn't it? Yeah, it has a tremendous amount of agreement. And so much so that the humanity that participates in that reality has no question about it. You don't see a lot of questioning going on by your average person about what's real and who they are. You don't see that, right? All of that gets handled very early on. And the way it gets handled very on is we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about preparing you to live in this society, in this reality that we all share with one another. Yeah, and then it goes on, and and as it goes on, the implications of the situation in terms of people not knowing who they are, and in terms of reality not being what people think it is, it starts to have consequences. Yeah, and it doesn't take much to see how that will start to have consequences. If you and I are brought up in a world in which we're separate from one another, right? And if we're brought up in a world in which this flesh bag, this tube, Alan Watts called it a tube. You put stuff in this end of the tube and it comes out this end of the tube. But it's a tube, right? And so we all learn, that this is real, this is true. So it's within that world that we attempt to live a life, isn't it? Yeah, it's within the world you were conditioned in, society you grew up in, and so forth, and you attempt to live a life. And based on what you learn, it seems as though the life to live is one in which the good life, right, is the life in which you're successful. right? You remember this? This is what you taught in school. The good life is the life of which is the life in which you are successful. What's that mean? Well, it means that you get a good education. It means that hopefully you have enough brains that can carry you through, right? Or else you're already suffering one of the limitations, right? And then get a good education for what? Get a good education to make money and to be successful, to have power, to get recognition, to fit in, to look good. And if you're successful in all of these ways, then you can have a happy life, according to Life magazine. You ever notice back, if you look at the old editions of Life magazine, a lot of those magazines had pictures of American life, didn't they? Yeah, and it was always with the car and the beautiful woman and the clothes and then this and then that. So that's the world that we live in. That's the presentation, right? That's the deal that you grow up in. And then along the way, you begin to understand that that's not the whole story, that along the way you begin to understand that you have to measure up. You have to fit in, right? And it's only the very few lucky who are born to be a model. It's only the very few lucky that are born to be Einstein, right? It's only a very few lucky that are born to be Bruce Jenner and can be a person who's on the cover of Wheaties and then become a woman. Only a few people can do these things, you see. So most of us fall somewhere in the middle of all that, if we're lucky, right? Yeah, because the system is a setup in a sense, right? Everybody doesn't have the same abilities. Everybody doesn't look the same. Everybody wasn't born in a rich family. Everybody, doesn't have the same IQ, right? So you're all thrown into that, and then somehow the comparison process starts. You go to school, and where do you fall in? How smart are you compared to the other kids? How good looking are you compared to the other kids? How much money does your family have compared to the other kids? And so on. And the process goes like that. And the consequences of this way of being in reality is that we end up with probably, you could say, the most devastating consequence of what I just described is war, isn't it? Because if you really examine what war is about, right, it's about that some country has a lot, another country doesn't have so much, right? So already there's the beginning of tension, right? Or some country has a lot and wants a little more, right? So they said, we're thinking about including the Ukraine, right? And this has gone on and on for thousands of years. So not much has changed in regard to all of that. And human suffering has gone on that long as well. And human suffering, by the way, has gotten worse for a number of different reasons. First of all, there's more humans to suffer, right? And then secondly, there's new forms of human suffering that didn't exist in the past that come with this modern society that we live in terms of the pace of life, the psychological pressures that we experience and so forth. And psychologically, human beings are weaker than they ever were, because it's 100 years ago when people lived on farms, families were close-knit. There wasn't the internet, there wasn't social media, there wasn't even TV. People were forced to relate to one another more and depend on one another anymore, and that's all changed. Things are changing, and the way they're changing is not in a very good direction for a lot of different reasons. All the more reason, if there is a way to escape from this suffering, if there is a way to be happy in this life, if there is a way to experience some degree of satisfaction, if there's a way in this life to see things in a clear way where you can see what's happening instead of being blind to reality, then it would be a better idea now than it ever was to wake up. Better idea now than it ever was. But the problem is, it's not going to happen by itself. You can't take a pill for this. This isn't one of those things you can take a pill for. The only way that you can get the freedom that's possible is to undo your relationship to what's been done. Undo your relationship to what's been done. In other words, you can't take everything out of your brain that's been put in your brain, right? But you can start by having a relationship to what is in your brain that allows you to begin to see that there are a lot of unworkable patterns there. There are a lot of unworkable ways that you are that create suffering. You know, that's why modern psychology exists. That's why psychotherapy exists. Because people's behaviors create problems, create suffering for them and for other people. People suffer from being overwhelmed by mental and emotional conditions, and that's getting worse. It's worse than it ever was now in the entire world. There's more depression than there has ever been in the history of the planet right now. There's more anxiety than there has ever been in the history of the planet right now. And human beings as humanity are in a more unstable place in terms of their relationship with one another than they ever were. And we have the ability to completely annihilate all of us. So with that understood, you have to ask yourself, in the brief period of time that you're going to get to be here, and it is brief if you're realistic, right? Are you willing to just accept that that's it, you know, and make the best of it, you know, and, you know, do whatever you got to do to make the best of it? Or are you willing to entertain the possibility that you can actually get free from this mess? You can actually experience happiness that's a spontaneous experience. It's not coming from how much money you have. You can actually experience clarity and have an insight into the nature of reality such that you can relax and let go and not be so concerned and fearful about what happens in the future. To involve yourself in an understanding of reality that can alleviate all of your threat about the future. That's a real possibility. However, none of what I just said is free lunch. None of what I just said is going to just happen. You know, you may be lucky like I did back in the 70s and drop LSD and, you know, have a brief period of clarity where you see these kinds of things, right? Or other people have spontaneous moments where they see these kinds of things. A lot of times it happens after a serious tragedy or an unexpected shock, right? It motivates people, you know, to look into this further. But it's not free lunch. It means that in order for you, if you see the value, if you understand what's possible, and if you don't want to live out your life the way life goes for most people, then you have to be willing to take on a project called being conscious. And you have to be willing to take on a project called waking up. And you have to start looking out there and seeing that you're not alone. You know, that there are more and more people on the planet that are studying these teachings and practices, and these teachings and practices are developing, you know, for example, probably within the next year or two at most, the FDA will approve psychedelic drugs as part of psychological treatment. Psychedelic drugs, something that 20 years ago you'd be considered crazy for taking that. And now they're going to say, no, this is treatment. This is medical, this is psychiatric treatment, this is psychological treatment. That's how unstable the world is. Something can be against the law one day, and it's not against the law the next day. Right? So there's a lot of instability and a lot of mistrust that is part of the world we're living in right now. So if you're interested in this and you're interested in becoming part of the minority who is working toward freedom, who is working toward being awake and fully alive, then the practice of meditation is a way to do that. And the teachings that go along with the practice of meditation is a way to do that. But the odds are against you. I have to be honest. The odds are against you. The deck is stacked against you, right? Because you carry around with you a brain that's been completely indoctrinated and conditioned to be a common, everyday human being that functions the way the rest of the neurotic, common day, human beings are functioning. So you got that to deal with, right? And then you got the fact that you live in a world in which everybody is still operating with the reality by consensus. Everybody's still operating that war makes sense. Everybody's still operating that There's still a lot of people that believe in life sucks and then you die, right? So you're still operating in a world where there's a lot of confusion, right? There's a lot of unpredictability. And there are a lot of people who think that what I just got done saying here is baloney, is nonsense. Don't believe any of the stuff that guy says, just, have a beer. So, any other questions? One of the things about this class is if you come to this class on a regular basis, what we practice here is a very simple, straightforward way of meditating. And if you do that consistently, and by consistently I mean every day, that's what it would take to change this brain. You were practicing what this brain has you do every day. So you have to practice something else every day in order to take that back, to get that back. So you have to practice every day. And then you have to also study. You have to study. You studied to get to where you are, didn't you? Yeah, formal and informal. You studied to get to where you are. So you have to study to get out of where you are now. You have to study to get out of where you are. And there's a lot of material. We live at a time right now where you have more of an opportunity to wake up and experience the truth of who you are and experience the truth of reality than any other time in humanity. There's more available than any other time in humanity. Just by virtue of the fact that the internet exists, every teacher from the beginning of recorded time when it comes to spiritual teaching and meditation is available to you. Every teacher from the beginning of recorded time. One of the things that I find amazing is a day doesn't go by that I don't get on my computer and start looking around and find another new teacher. A day doesn't go by. Just the other day I was on the computer and I came across this guy who was a Zen Master, who was a teacher from a Korean form of Zen. And so whenever I see these things, I'm always interested in how that came about. This guy was a good Catholic boy from New Jersey. Is that the video you saw? Yeah. Good Catholic kid from New Jersey. Went to Cornell, very bright, went to Harvard, right? And then he was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he heard a Zen Master speak, right? And he followed that Zen Master and left his family and left his career and went to Korea and became a student of that Zen Master. And that Zen Master, before he died, passed the lineage on to him. And now this good Catholic boy from New Jersey is a Zen Master. And he has a Zen center in Germany that he leads. Right? So this happens again and again and again. There's over and over again. You can go back and look at Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. You can look at all these people who went through these processes. If you go back far enough, you can find, many great teachers at the turn of the century, that were teaching these things. And for those of you who have been in the class, you know that I've introduced a lot of people to you here. And we have an email list where I send a lot of links out so you can listen to these masters yourself. And the value and the beauty of listening to these masters is you can listen to a Christian-oriented, right? You can listen to a Christian-oriented master like Richard Rohr, right? You can listen to a Japanese Zen master. You can listen to a Chinese Zen master. You can listen to different psychologists out there who are speaking and teaching these teachings and practices. So there's a tremendous amount of material available for you. So there's no possible complaint that this is unavailable or too hard. Neither one of those things are true. It takes a real organized effort. That's why in this class, if you noticed in this class, it wasn't long as we continued to do the class that I started to add things like the books that I've written, right? And the email list and the YouTube channel, right? Because the more resources you have, the better it is. The more you read about this, the more motivated you get because you get inspired. The word inspired means that breath is being breathed into you, inspiration. You get inspired. And you need to get inspired, right? Because the psychological and emotional state of most of humanity these days is dead. is dead. They can't get it up. They can't motivate themselves to do some of the things that are in their best interest. So don't be one of those people. Don't let that happen to you. Don't let your life go by and not experience any real joy or real happiness or real satisfaction. Don't let that happen. It happens too often. And the fact that you're here means that for some reason, whether you believe in predestination or not, the fact that you're here means for some reason the universe has put you in the chair you're in right here, right now. And that may be because you're in the queue. It may be because you're in line to come up and wake up. Of all of humanity, your turn has come to be exposed to the possibility of being alive and fully awake. That's what you don't want to miss. And you're like I said before, the odds are against you because your mind is conditioned a completely different way. And the world is operating a completely different way. So you're on your own when it comes to this. You really have to be the source of your own motivation and source of your own actions. But the payoff, right? The payoff, and I'm not limiting this at all when I say the payoff is for you to get everything you ever wanted. That's the payoff. Because I tell you, no matter what you think, that everything you've ever wanted was an experience that you wanted to have. And what this offers, what this promises, is that that's available to you, but first you have to get the clouds out of the way. First you have to get the misunderstandings cleared up. And first you have to do the practices that will get you in tune with reality, Your assignment is ongoing. And that is to practice every single day. And your assignment is to, every single day, spend some time looking on YouTube or at a book, looking at some material that's written by a legitimate teacher, right, to keep developing a deeper understanding of what this is all about. It takes that, because without that, this will bounce right off you. It'll bounce right off you, and next Sunday morning, you'll wake up and say, oh, no. So you got to be willing to have that happen and have it not stop you. If you can be willing to have that voice in your head keep trying to stop you from exercising your full potential and not stop, if you can have that voice in your head do that and not stop, you're well on your way.